HUD stats for range adjustments. Table dynamics, what you can actually trust. Your HUD is a probability engine, not a personality test. In online pools, multi-tabling and rake drag compress edges, so your pre-flop decisions must be clean and repeatable. Your job is to sort opponents into categories fast, then adjust your opening, 3-bet, and defense ranges for expected value. Hierarchy of pre-flop HUD stats in order. First, VPIP, who enters pots. Second, PFR, who enters aggressively. Third, VPIP minus PFR gap, how much limp, call, and passivity exists. Fourth, fold to 3-bet, who overfolds to pressure. Fifth, 4-bet, who can protect their range. Use sample size rules so you do not spew with fake precision from tracking software. First, VPIP/PFR starts stabilizing around 150 to 300 hands. Second, fold to 3-bet needs 200 plus opportunities, not just hands. Third, when uncertain, default to pool baselines and play a tighter, higher equity realization. R, strategy. The poker place. Exploit framework. First, the exploit, trust big samples, then push thin edges harder. Second, the risk, small samples create phantom leaks. You over-adjust and burn rake. Third, the counter, if their stats converge toward baseline, snap back to your default ranges. VPIP/PFR gap, the range construction shortcut. VPIP tells you how wide they are. PFR tells you how much of that width is aggressive. The gap tells you if your pre-flop value comes from isolation and 3-betting or from realizing equity post-flop versus calls. Use these opponent buckets. First, tight aggressive, small gap. For example, 18 to 22 VPIP and 16 to 20 PFR. Second, loose passive, large gap. For example, 35 to 55 VPIP and 5 to 15 PFR. Third, loose aggressive, medium gap. For example, 28 to 40 VPIP and 20 to 32 PFR. Fourth, knit, low VPIP and low PFR, cap continuing ranges and high fold frequency. Range implications. First, big gap players are typically capped when they call opens. They lack strong 3-bets and 4-bets. Second, small gap players arrive more uncapped. They protect with strong raises and 3-bets. Third, your 3-bet strategy shifts between linear versus polarized ranges based on how often they continue and how they continue. The poker place exploit framework. First, the exploit. Isolate and 3-bet passives, avoid fancy bluffs versus tight uncapped ranges. Second, the risk. You assume capped when they are slow playing or trapping. Third, the counter. If their 4-bet and 5-bet frequencies rise, remove thin 3-bet bluffs and tighten your continues. Fold to 3-bet. Pure expected value and minimum defense frequency. Fold to 3-bet is your cleanest pre-flop exploit stat. If they fold too much, you print with immediate fold equity. If they defend correctly, you must build ranges that realize equity and avoid dominated bluff candidates. Anchor it with minimum defense frequency, MDF, versus a 3-bet. Example, you open to 2.5 big blinds 3-bets to 9 big blinds. Your open risks 2.5 big blinds to win the blinds, but once 3-bet, their sizing forces you to continue at a frequency that avoids giving them auto profit. Practical thresholds for online pools. First, fold to 3-bet 60% plus, overfolding, increase 3-bet volume. Second, fold to 3-bet 45% to 60%, closer to equilibrium, use balanced construction. Third, fold to 3-bet under 45%, sticky, shift toward value dense. 3-bets and tighten bluffs. Range building rules. First, versus high folds, use more polarized 3-bets, add strong blockers with good playability like ace-5 suited through ace-2 suited, plus value like pocket queens and better and ace-king. Second, versus low folds, use more linear 3-bets, widen value into hands that dominate their calls, such as pocket 10s through pocket queens, ace-queen suited, through ace-jack suited and king-queen suited. Blockers/unblockers decide which bluffs survive, versus 4 bets and calls. First, prefer ace-x suited as 3-bet bluffs because they block ace-king and pocket aces. Second, avoid dominated offsuit broadways like king-jack offsuit as a 3-bet bluff versus callers. They realize poorly and get reverse implied odds. Third, when you expect calls, pick suited hands with higher equity realization R, such as 8-7 suited and 10-9 suited, but only in the right positions. The poker place exploit framework. First, the exploit, attack high fold to 3-bet with a polarized 3-bet plan and push them below MDF. Second, the risk, you over bluff into a player who starts defending or 4-betting, and your rake-adjusted expected value collapses. Third, the counter, when they defend more, linearize, reduce bluff frequency, and increase 3-bet sizing for value. Button or cutoff versus big blind, standard online lines. This is where table dynamics show up fastest in tracking software. Your exploit comes from adjusting your open frequency and your response to big blind 3 bets. Do not drift into hope poker calls. Every call must have a plan for realizing equity and defending versus barrels. Versus big blind profiles using VPIP/PFR gap. First, big blind high VPIP and low PFR, loose passive, defend wider in position, and 3, bet them more for value. Second, big blind low VPIP and moderate PFR, tighter, steal more, but defend 3 bets tighter. Open adjustments. First, when big blind overfolds to steals and 3 bets poorly, open wider from button with hands like ace-9 offsuit, king-10 offsuit, and queen-10 offsuit. Second, when big blind is aggressive and 3 bets often, tighten your bottom opens, keep higher R, suited hands like 7-6 suited, and fold low playability offsuit trash. Defense versus big blind 3 bets. First, versus high fold to 3-bet big blind, you can 4-bet bluff more. With ace-5 suited through ace-4 suited due to blockers/unblockers. Second, versus sticky big blind, prefer calling with suited hands that realize better and 4-bet for value more often with pocket queens and better and ace-king. The poker place exploit framework. First, the exploit, widen steals and punish big blind overfolding and value press, versus wide passive continues. Second, the risk, opening too wide. Versus a strong regular pool increases 3-bet pressure and rake exposure. Third, the counter, if big blind increases 3 bets, tighten opens, defend with higher R, and add a small set of blocker 4 bets. Out of position, stress test, small blind and big blind adjustments. Out of position, your edge leaks through poor equity realization, R. You cannot compensate by calling wider. Build tighter, higher quality continuing ranges, then apply pressure with better structure. Small blind versus button open, choosing linear versus polarized ranges. First versus button. Who overfolds to 3 bets, you can run a more polarized 3-bet strategy, value plus blocker bluffs like ace-5 suited through ace-2 suited. Second, versus button. Who calls a lot, run a more linear 3-bet strategy, add hands like king-queen suited, ace-jack suited, pocket 10s through pocket queens. Big blind versus cutoff, open, do not defend junk because it is cheap. First, hands like 8-7 suited can defend because they realize equity with connectivity and nut potential. Second, hands like king-jack offsuit often under-realize because they are dominated and face reverse implied odds. Third, small pairs like pocket 4s are not automatic calls. You need implied odds, weak squeezers behind, and a plan versus C bets. Anti-hope poker rules out of position. First, do not set mine pocket 4s without stacks in a weak range to win from. Second, do not flat king-jack offsuit versus tight 3 bets. You get dominated and your R collapses. Third, if you cannot describe your continue range and your post-flop check range, you are guessing. The poker place. Exploit framework. First, the exploit, tighten out-of-position flats, 3-bet with structure, and punish players who fold below MDF. Second, the risk, over 3-betting, out-of-position versus strong imposition, players creates bloated pots with low realization. Third, the counter. If they start 4-betting, reduce bluffs, increase value density, and call more with suited hands that realize. Scenario box. Hero hand, 8 of spades, 7 of spades in small blind. Flop, King of clubs, 9 of hearts, 4 of spades. Action, button opens 2.5 big blinds. You 3-bet to 9 big blinds. Button calls, you c-bet 33% pot. If button has a high VPIP/PFR gap and low fold to 3-bet, their pre-flop call range is wide and capped. Your 3-bet should be more linear, and your flop sizing should prioritize realization and deny equity. With 8-7 suited, you are a low showdown hand with backdoor equity, so you bet small often, then barrel turns that add equity or pressure their capped range. Turn barrel candidates. First, spades, such as 2 of spades, 5 of spades, queen of spades. Second, straight cards, such as 10 of hearts, 6 of clubs. If button has high fold to 3-bet, you're pre-flop. 3-bet can be more polarized. You win immediately often, and when called, you proceed with aggression guided by blockers/unblockers and board coverage. Multi-way and tough spots, HUD-based discipline. Multi-way pots are where HUD-driven over-aggression spews the most. When a passive player calls and a regular is behind, your fold equity collapses and your MDF requirements change. In rake-heavy games, avoid thin flats and thin squeezes that rely on perfect runouts. Pre-flop rules for multi-way dynamics. First, if caller has a big VPIP/PFR gap, isolate with value-heavy ranges. Hands like ace-queen offsuit, king-queen suited, pocket jacks, and better. Second, if caller is sticky and the opener is uncapped, avoid bluff squeezes with hands like king-jack offsuit. Third, use suited blockers like ace-5 suited as selective squeeze bluffs, only when opener overfolds and callers are capped. The poker place exploit framework. First, the exploit in multi-way skew value and deny odds do not rely on hope-based folds. Second, the risk, you misread who is capped, then get trapped by an uncapped regular range. Third, the counter, if the pool starts trapping more, lower bluff frequency and increase your check range protection. Key takeaway, the Poker Place Academy. Use VPIP, PFR, and the VPIP-PFR gap to classify how capped their calls are. Use fold to 3-bet to choose linear versus polarized ranges, then enforce fold equity with sizing and discipline. When you are out of position, protect your expected value by prioritizing equity realization, R, respecting MDF, and selecting bluffs using blockers/unblockers. Now, let's test your edge. Question 1. What is the article's stated hierarchy of pre-flop HUD stats, from most important to least? Answer, VPIP, PFR, VPIP minus PFR gap, fold to 3-bet, 4-bet. Explanation, the article ranks these stats to help you prioritize what to trust first when making pre-flop range adjustments. Question 2. According to the sample size rules, around how many hands do VPIP/PFR start stabilizing, and what should you do when you're uncertain? Answer, VPIP/PFR start stabilizing around 150 to 300 hands. When uncertain, default to pool baselines and play tighter with higher equity realization. Explanation, the article warns against fake precision and recommends conservative defaults until stats become reliable. Question 3. What does a large VPIP minus PFR gap typically imply about an opponent's calling range versus opens? And what does a small gap imply? Answer, a large gap suggests they are typically capped when they call opens. A small gap suggests they arrive more uncapped and protect with strong raises and 3-bets. Explanation, the gap is used as a shortcut for whether strength is missing from their continuing range or still present via aggressive actions. Question 4. What are the article's practical fold to 3-bet thresholds, and what 3-bet style does it recommend when fold to 3-bet is 60% plus versus under 45%? Answer: 60% plus is overfolding, 45 to 60% is closer to equilibrium, under 45% is sticky, versus 60% plus use more polarized 3-bets, versus under 45% use more linear, value-dense 3-bets and tighten bluffs. Explanation. The article uses fold to 3-bet as a clean exploit stat that directly drives whether you lean on fold equity, polarized, or domination and value realization, linear. Question 5. In the scenario box, if button has a high VPIP/PFR gap and low fold to 3-bet, what does the article say about 1. Button's pre-flop call range, 2. Your 3-bet construction, and 3. Your flop sizing priority? Answer: 1. Wide and capped. 2. More linear 3-bet strategy. 3. Flop sizing should prioritize realization and denying equity. Explanation. The article ties the opponent's gap and low fold tendency to a capped, wide range that you can pressure with structured value-driven ranges and small realization-focused C-bets. Study hard, play smart. That's it for now. I'll see you in the next lesson.